I'm Ken Paulson, the director of the Free Speech Center at Middle Tennessee State University. Welcome to a conversation about prayer in American public life. We are honored today to have Dr. John Weil, a scholar of the Constitution, a man who knows the issues involving principles of religion and the needs and importance of public life, because several days a week he is a scholar on the Constitution, and every Sunday he is a pastor. This is a man who inhabits both those worlds with comparable passion.
Yes.
And yet you would hear from a lot of people today, John, that they seem to be in conflict. You hear, it's often said that God has been driven out of the public school, and I'm sure you have thoughts about all of that. But is religion and public life, are they incompatible somehow?
I think state support for religion is very questionable. Going all the way back to Madison, I'll probably repeat it later, but Voltaire has a statement that Madison liked a lot, which said, if you have a country with one religion, you tend to have tyranny. If there are two religions, you tend to have civil war. And if you have multiple religions, you have religious freedom. And Madison argued, now he was making an argument that fit what he wanted to do, but he and Jefferson and others actually suggested that churches generally and clergy members generally behave better when they relied on the support of their congregations than when they were given sinecures on the part of the state. And so I think, there are different ways to account for it, but the United States, particularly compared to most European nations, maybe not Poland, there'd probably be a few exceptions, but most Western European nations, American people traditionally have been more religious. Now there's some myths out there. Church membership was actually relatively low at the American Revolution, but particularly after the Second Great Awakening in the 19th century and forward, on through the 1950s and 60s, a lot more people in the United States identified as church members than others. And I guess I would say, to people who are skeptical of both, all of us have a worldview. One can be just as influenced by an atheistic or a deistic, Hinduistic, whatever your worldview is, you bring it with you. And people who say, well, I don't have any religion, so I don't have any point of view, well, they do have a point of view. And I just happen to have one that, believes there's a God, believes he cares for us, believes in prayer, and don't really see any incompatibility. The incompatibility would be if I insisted, that I lead everyone in prayer before my classes or that sort of thing.
This is the book in question, Prayer in American Public Life, and I have to ask you, where does that striking image come from?
I love the image, and that's one of the best things about this book. As you remember, I lobbied hard to get that. It actually comes from a period in American history where there was more of a fusion of church-state in terms of international objectives than any other time, namely the 1950s. That's the time when we added In God We Trust, where we added Under God to the flag. It's the time where we had the first National Prayer Breakfast. And this was an image that was produced by Conrad Hilton, who was one of the sponsors. He was a hotelier, one of the sponsors of the National Prayer Breakfast. And this image of Uncle Sam praying, it's called America on His Knees, is on one side, and then there was a prayer that somewhat corresponds to the Lord's Prayer with a few more sort of additions for America and whatever in the prayer. But I love the angularity, I guess, partly, and as one whose mother always insisted that one never wore one's hat in church, at least not a man, I really appreciate the fact that his hat is there by his side rather than on his head.
The book is actually a joy to read. It's called an encyclopedia, which sounds daunting.
Yes.
But that's really just the format, the notion that basically anything and everything that involves public life and prayer is in there. Some fun things, some profound things. Is there anything you stumbled across that you said, I had no idea?
One of the things that I knew that there were inaugural addresses, and Dr. Burns will appreciate this, where, that had a prayer in them, but I really did not know how extensive the references were, going all the way back to George Washington. And you actually had at least two presidents, Dwight D. Eisenhower, before he gave his inaugural address, actually asked people, I hope you'll bow with me in a moment of prayer, and he read out a prayer. FDR read a prayer over the radio on the day of the D-Day invasion, and I believe it was, Dr. Burns may know, one of the Bushes I know also did sort of like Eisenhower did and had a separate prayer. And I wasn't surprised so much that they occasionally appeared, but how frequently they appeared. And one of the other things that I find interesting, and it's not, I don't know if it was unexpected or not, but one of the things I tried to keep track of, one of the places where we do have prayer in public places that the Supreme Court has not yet struck down and may never, is in legislative assemblies. And one of the things that's interesting is to trace the first rabbi or the first Hindu or the first Muslim, first Native American religion, and you can just sort of see that giving them an opportunity to pray in a public place is not really so much a spiritual dimension as it is sort of a sense of we recognize that you're included in the polity as well. And I think in that way it's sort of, I guess if you're based on strict if your government was based on strict orthodoxy, then you would say, if you were Trinitarian, you'd say, well, you can't pray if you're a non-Trinitarian. But in a society that's based on free exercise of religion, it's a way of sort of recognizing you may have different beliefs than we do, but you also pray, that it's sort of a universal expression. I've even, there's in here some social scientific research, they talk about there are no atheists in foxholes, that people pray in foxholes, and sometimes they do, but there are surveys that suggest that even atheists pray. There's something inherent in human nature that seeks a connection to what I would call the divine. Maybe other people have different words for it, but I think I think in some ways it can divide us, but it also can unite us.
Let me ask you about one of the most frequently debated and discussed issues, and that's the exercise of religious beliefs in a public school. And could you explain why it is that public school teachers are prohibited from leading their classes in prayer?
And you phrased it right, because the saying is, as long as there are tests, there will be prayer in public schools. And there's, or anywhere else, there's nothing to prevent an individual in school from uttering silent prayer. If you're at your own lunch table, you could pray there. The difficulty becomes, as Engel versus Vitale, established in 1962, who's going to write the prayer, and is it going to be inclusive of everyone? Are you going to make some people feel like outsiders? So it's, there are two basic principles related to religion in the First Amendment. One is, of course, free exercise, but the other is that there's no establishment of religion. The government, the government's not going to put its thumb on the scale and say that that one religion is going to have prominence over another. And you saw this consistently in the 19th century, long before Engel came along. The predominant American culture was Protestant. And teachers and superintendents, they honestly did not understand that requiring a reading from the King James Version of the Bible, which was not accepted by Catholics, and prescribing a prayer, reading the Bible without comment, which Catholics, as a general rule, believe that you needed the ministerium, you needed interpretation along with it. They saw, well, that's just Christian. They didn't understand that it was a particular form of Christianity. And, if you reversed it, in fact, you'll see this, you'll see outrage if somebody were to come to school and give a Hindu prayer or a Buddhist prayer, but they don't realize that they're imposing that on others when they do it themselves. So I'm actually fairly comfortable. Maybe we've been in constitutional law too long, but with the notion that it's not the government's business to prescribe prayers for school children.
By limiting one faith, you're protecting the faith of all.
That's right. And again, you can't eliminate silent prayer. People, and sometimes you'll see a court decision where, a teacher will bring a Bible to school and there'll be some ruckus about, we had it on his desk and, doesn't appear to have been trying to proselytize. Sometimes sort of crazy things happen, but the kernel of the decision is that, it's not up to public officials to tell us what to believe or how to worship.
Well, thank you for your insights, and thank you for this remarkable new book, Prayer in American Public Life, from First Amendment Press.
Thank you.
Thank you, John Weil.